Hello, it's 12:30 on a Tuesday, and wherever you are in the world, I hope you too are having a fabulous day. And for us today at the Mindset Michelle TV show, it's an extra special day. And welcome, firstly, to my guest. Hello, Wayne.
Michelle, how are you? Thank you
I'm
very
good.
much for having me on.
Thank you for coming on, and thank you for being my extra special guest today on what for me is, oh my God, after 2 years and after this year of doing this show, to get to the 50th episode, I'm just so super excited, as you can tell. And as per Wayne could tell beforehand, it was like, oh my God, everything's everywhere. And it's just so exciting. So as you can see, we've got in the balloons and we've also got in the cake. So this is the viewer participation part where I'm going to light the candles on the cake. I have to look at the cake for a moment to do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to count to 5 because it's the 50th episode. We won't make you count to 50. That would be quite funny, wouldn't it, Wayne? Making everybody count to 50.
We get to the end of the show.
We would. We'd be through a half-hour show and that counting to, just in the counting to 50. Okay, the number 5 cake doesn't want to. Okay, and we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll go happy anniversary. So, what? Everyone, count of 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Happy anniversary! Yay! 50th show. Yay! I hope you all blew with me. I should have been on Play School, shouldn't I? Thank you, Wayne, and thank you, everybody, for indulging me in what has been a really exciting milestone to meet the 50th show. I'm sure when I started at show number 1 with the lovely Carol O'Halloran, I never would have imagined that 50 shows later we'd be here. And importantly, because this show is about you, thank you for indulging me in the little bit about me, but this show is about you, the viewers. And today's guest, Wayne Larkin, is an extra special treat for you. And all the people I've met and fabulous people I've met, I've not come across somebody who is really a gentleman, a person with so much depth and background and expertise across so many areas. And I'll get Wayne to tell you a little bit about his background. But some of the highlights are the work he's done with the military, with the veterans, the work that he's done in advertising, winning 28 awards over the 30 plus years that he's been involved in that, as well as being an Australian represented in parachuting, many, many other things, too many for me to spell all out, but we want Wayne to tell us all about it. So please, Wayne, let us know a little bit about you and your background.
Yes, certainly. And just a quick overview. I've been involved as a creative director for over 40 years and worked in the record industry in the late 70s. And I do remember some of that. I worked for a global advertising agency, Daldane Burnback, and ran my own accredited advertising agency and design studio. We also consulted for some of Australia's largest companies, media organisations and government, both at federal, state, local, and worked on a $5.5 billion reform project for the Australian Defence and worked with the Australian Government Innovation Department in Canberra. I also headed a national crisis disaster management project valued at over $80 million. And to date I've won multiple international and national awards for my work, and I've been guest lecturer at universities and also small business for 10 years part-time. And I was the director for a successful software company for 10 years and was director of a successful also advertising agency contracted to like Fairfax Media Group, Win TV, which is the largest network in Australia, and 4 radio stations. And I've been on boards and advisory boards to many charities. And I've done many sports through my life, including skydiving, scuba diving, snow skiing, and in ski patrol. Represented Australia in paraski, which was also to do giant slalom champion in Australia, and water skiing, field skating, surf life saving, also swimming training in squads, hang gliding, bushwalking, camping, gymnastics, rock climbing, martial arts, qigong, tai chi, fencing, to name a few.
Wow, that's a long list that you've got there, and I'm sure with all of that long list, and I can just see that it looks like you were reading their way, and so
Yes, sorry, because I forget a lot of the detail. I guess there's been quite a lot.
yeah, and the thing that encapsulates all that is the high standard that you got to, and whatever you were actually turning your hand to, whether it was representing Australia with the parachuting or the awards in advertising, with this incredibly celebrated and awarded career and background. What do you think for you is the definition of success? What does it mean to you?
That's a very good question. I guess one of the things is that I had quite a strong love for life, and
Ah,
when I looked at things, I wanted to try it all and do it all really, and experience it. And one of the things I found is that the more I learnt about varied things, the more they appeared to become the same. They transcended each other in the sense of mindset. So the sort of mindset you would have in sport, and particularly really high level, where you had to use meditation and create a state of mind that surpassed your ability to be conscious and physically think at speed, because you just wouldn't be fast enough to be at the high end of sport. And that also applies to creativity as well, and coming up with new innovative ideas and things. So yeah, it sort of started to turn me into a polymath, I guess, and we had lots of experiences, understand a lot about history, and you're able to see projects and situations in new ways.
I love that. We've talked before on the show a little bit about getting into that zone, and I think that that's a really good way for people to think about it. That those elite athletes, they practice something over and over and over again. The muscle memory, everything is in place, but then they go into that zone, and it's a similar process when you're working and you're feeling like you're in the flow and you're feeling creative. And I love how for you that success is, just enjoying those new creative and curiosity around what else you can do. And it's reflected in the number of different things you worked on in your career, as well as the different sports that you've been involved in.
Yeah, I think curiosity is a really big key, um, and imagination, because I think that there's really, your imagination helps create your reality. And so if you have a very narrow view or siloed view of the world, that's a lot of what you'll tend to create.
So true. And that's why the show is all about mindset. Or we really believe that, or I really believe that if you change your thoughts, you can change your world. And these tips that we share each week with people that help people to change their thoughts. With that in mind, what sort of tips or suggestions do you have for people with your incredible background, whether it's from advertising or from sports or from the veterans work that you've done? What sort of success tips would you share with people?
Yeah, I think there's three things that come up quite commonly all the time that are really, really critical, whether it be for sport or business or charities or whatever it might be. And that is that you really got to get the right people. That's a really critical factor for a lot of reasons. One, the right people, like a thousand mediocre people won't beat one genius. And the other thing is that it's always good to have high-level people around you that are smarter than you and better than you, because you're able to learn a lot faster. And also they support you as well. So having the right people is the number one critical thing. And then the other one's the environment. It's really creating an environment where people feel safe. They feel they can be very creative, and changing language in that context as well as part of the environment. So instead of talking about failing, what you're looking at is rapid learning. Because sometimes what someone might class as, that's a judgment rather than observation, classes a failure can then actually be used for something else to be quite successful. And so by that rapid learning, you are able to store a lot of memories in what things can and can't be useful.
I really like those first two tips about the people. There's a lot of commentary on social media about surrounding yourself with the right people, but I think that part of that loses that that element about surrounding yourself with people that also might stretch you intellectually, stretch you athletically or in some way, because they're slightly better or slightly more experienced in that area. And you can only really learn from people that have actually got more experience or got more background. And again, it comes to that second point of yours around environment. And some environments that might work better than others for you, because in some environments you might feel more comfortable being stretched like that than others. And I think that those are really two very good points about the people and the environment being so important.
Yeah, and the other one, of course, to that is asking the right questions. The ability of people, judging people not on answers they give, because most people are trained, from school or when they're going for a job of what to say, but really judging people on the questions they ask. That's a really critical factor, and most people ask the wrong questions.
Oh, and what do you mean? I'm sure lots of people are wondering, what do you mean by asking the wrong questions?
Yeah, when they look at an environment or try to solve a problem, a lot of people are pre-programmed within a silo. So they basically know a lot of information about a very narrow area of expertise. One of the things is a lot of the problems are a lot more complex than that. And they far extend the way people see the world. Like a classic example would be, engineers, not picking on them particularly, but they can be very good at designing boxes, but can have a lot of problems thinking outside them. It's that classic thing of go back to your cubicle and think outside the box. And so people just live in a certain world. And so it can be very hard for them to get the altitude, because when you get really good altitude, it changes your attitude and your perceptions on things. And so having good situational awareness, where you can see things for what they are and don't have bias in the way you see things, allows you to see problems more realistically and the causality of them. So the right
That's
question.
so true, yeah. Having that altitude, and they talk about that a lot in management world around having altitude around problems. And I agree, a lot of that is actually just so that you have a wider perspective on what the problem is, and whether you're in IT doing root cause analysis or any of those different fields like engineering, being able to have that higher level where you're actually looking at things and trying to understand them. In my world, it's understanding it a lot through different people's perceptions of what reality might be. It doesn't change what the reality is, but it's their perception of what the reality is, and helping them to see that, well, perhaps reality wasn't like that, because there is only a few things, as you know, that are quite definitive in reality. A lot of it is actually then just our version of what that reality is.
Yeah, and I can give you a couple of two quick examples in relationship to that.
Yeah.
To do, let's say, with the environment and climate change, for example. There are some things we can do with climate change or not, but the reality is if you just do a quick thought experiment and you take the environment away or planet Earth away, our existence time is very short. So we totally rely on the life support system of the planet. But if we were taken off the planet itself, it would boom back really, really quickly. And we only make up, I think, 0.001% of the biomass of the planet. So one of the problems when you're looking at these is that humanity is probably the biggest problem in relationship to that, rather than it being climate change or other things like that, with in the effect. And it's the same with, if you look around the world with people, cardiovascular disease and heart attacks are the biggest killers in the world. So it's across all cultures, right? If you add them all up, it kills more people. So what people tend to do with that is that they can get a problem definition and say, okay, so it's obesity, to do with your diet, stress, not exercising enough, not sleeping enough. But in reality, taking too many drugs, drinking too much alcohol, the reality of it is that they're symptoms, and I would say that the causality of that is that generally people are unhappy.
What a wonderful distinction, and thank you so much for taking people down that path of cardiovascular and heart disease. That's like the outcome of what happens from these lifestyles, but the lifestyle of even eating food that you would consider relatively better for you is still so processed and so full of pesticides nowadays that it is very hard to live healthy and clean living. But quite apart from all of that, the actual root cause or the root symptoms come back to people being basically very unhappy nowadays. That's so true.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and of course, as everyone would be well aware, since COVID-19, that's made the situation a lot worse. Also, TVs and technical devices and things like that, not being connected to nature as much, and also not taking an inward journey. If you take the heart, for example, the old sayings of being guided by your heart. So really, when you look at people who have cardiovascular disease and heart attack, for example, they're dying of a broken heart because they're unhappy.
Yeah.
And, those things are really important to understand. The heart basically is 100 times produces more energy, and it produces 5,000 times more magnetic field than the brain. And also it has a brain within itself. And so a lot of that historical language about follow your heart and guide your heart and always protect it and always do things that you love is really, really critical, because it can be the death of you.
And yeah, for many, many ages and throughout much of literature, you hear that theme repeated, if you like, around people dying of a broken heart. I guess that given that people may have intuitively known some of what we're talking about today, what again, I would say, it's about doing more things like having silly balloons in a show to celebrate a milestone, or having a fabulous cake. Sorry, this balloons aren't silly, this cake's fabulous as well. But having those things to mark whatever milestone it is for you. It has been a difficult couple of years for people. So I would say to people about, doing things that make you happy, doing things that celebrate those little milestones that you've got through the year. You've done 50 shows. What other things would you say to support people in changing that mindset to focus on what you can do in your life and what you can do to be happy?
Yeah, you can't always change the situation around you, but you definitely can change the perception you have on it. So most people are very much affected by the external world. And when Hamish were asked, I think, in the States about why didn't they have a problem with COVID, they said because we don't have TVs. And so a lot of it's internalized, and most people don't have an internal journey and don't stabilize themselves. So they basically become interreactive to the external environment. So they lose control of themselves and their feelings, because what's ever happening externally is happening to them, and they feel that, rather than being internalized. I was lucky enough to be taught by a Native American Indian for a year. And one of the great chiefs that he grew up with, he spoke to him, and he was the last surviving member of his tribe, True Blood. He used to sit out every day with the full headset on and in a chair. It was one of those 60s chairs with the chrome legs and plastic seat. And he grew up with him over a long period, but he said he got to the point when he was 18 and said to him, at the end of the day, what are you chief of? He said, Europeans have come in and taken all your land. They've killed a lot of the people in your tribe. And so at the end of the day, what are you chief of? And he said, well, everything that you see externally is an illusion. Those things can be taken away from you. The only thing that's really true is what you control, and that's your internal feelings. And he said, I'm the chief of this tribe, and I'm never giving that away. And he said, what most people do is give it away. So when you see other Native American Indians quite depressed and sad, they're giving their power away to someone else.
That's wonderful, wonderful example, and I think it's such a great example that people can relate to as well. Whether in my experience, I think about reading Man's Search for Meaning, about the concentration camps and what it was, the difference between people that survived and didn't survive. It was that inner sense of purpose or inner sense of knowing of who you are. And I think with everything that's going on and the busyness and the technology, there's never been a greater time for people to go inwardly and connect more with that inward journey. So I really like that point that you've made about how impacted people can be by the outside world because they haven't spent the time going inwardly and looking at their inner world. And meditation is one of those great ways of doing it. What other suggestions for beginning that inner work would you make?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, one of the things they taught me in China when I was there with Tai Chi is that what's really important about meditation is it's a benchmark. But really, right through life, and monks talk about this as well, you should always be in a state of meditation. So you should always be inside yourself, looking out, and that's really the only thing that you can actually control. In the sense of creating practical things like laughing a lot, sleeping well, sleeping like a baby, that's really important. Being able to shut off those things you can control and can't control. Interesting, they did a study in the States, one of their main newspapers, and what they found was they're able to determine how long someone would live by the first thing they looked at in a newspaper.
Wow.
And so the people that lived the longest, the first thing they turned to and looked at was the comics.
Well, I've heard many a teacher that I've worked with talk about returning to that childlike state, not childish, but that childlike state. And I think that's how you, in my world, how you can create a happy heart as well is by having that childlike curiosity and excitement and enthusiasm for whatever you have going on in your life, but your inner life, celebrating what it is that you're doing internally. If you've had a good week, celebrating that. If you've got less angry with the kids, for example, or with your boss, if you notice that you did it 3 times rather than 5 times in a day or in a week, that's the stuff to celebrate, to keep celebrating the positive habits and the positive focus that you're creating and building in your life, and to keep reinforcing that that's the direction that you're going in.
Yeah, and people being really kind to themselves. Most people beat themselves up, unfortunately, and loving themselves and forgiving themselves, because you can't give what you don't have. And so that's really important. So to change the external environment, you've got to change the internal environment.
So true. And again, I think the kindness to yourself is the way, even if you don't know how to be happy or how to do many of the other things that we're talking about today, starting with just being kinder to yourself with wherever you're at is a really great place to start. And I wanted to also quickly touch before we run out of time on the work that you did with veterans, because I think it's such an important piece of work, and the lessons I'm sure you've learned are applicable across a lot of society now, given the increase in suicide and stress amongst people. But do you want to quickly explain what you were involved with?
Oh, yeah, with the PTSD?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that basically, doing that for about 6 years. What we look at is creating awareness on PTSD, and we do it for veterans. And also, it's very much a silent killer, and also first responders. So to do, with police and paramedics and ambulance and fire brigade, and they have a lot of traumas as well. And a lot of those things are quite silent. It's something that's not talked about very often. And there's some amazing understanding now with the technology we have, how to cure it. Some of the cure rates are around 85%, which people aren't aware of. And it's in really simple terms, it's about changing the perception and emotion that you allocate to a particular event. And so what happens is that a certain event or something will trigger something in your body, and then you'll associate that to a bad event. But unfortunately, it's a fairly big killer. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also
imagine.
people sad, like their life is not very productive always.
No, and I can imagine. See, I don't wear my headband, and my hair's my eye today.
Yeah.
It's quite funny. I can imagine. It's a very serious and a very important topic. So I just wanted to talk about it a little bit, because I think it's important for people watching to know that with something as serious and dramatic in that space, that there is good news. There is more and more therapies and things coming through to support some of our, really important veterans and first responders to come through that PTSD. So if people are suffering or upset about COVID in their lives in certain ways, then there's great news, because if there's things that now can support those extremes, then everyday life, dramas that feel very distressful to people can also be supported in much more great ways with technology now as well.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things is that a lot of resistance is really important, and prevention. And when you look at studies done by people in prisoner war camps, whether it's in Vietnam or Second World War, things like that, and how they survive really well, the important thing to understand is that the mind doesn't know the difference necessarily between reality and what you think. And so one of the things we found with a lot of those people is that they created a positive mindset. Like one of the gentlemen lived for a really long time, who should have died, years before. He used to imagine himself being on a beach, eating steaks and things like that. So his body responded in that particular way. And another particular prisoner just was always focusing on love and the positive things about the world. And of course, we're lucky with the long ride home, called the long ride home because when veterans go overseas, they come back, but they're really not back here. And so the trip home for them is can be quite long and tedious. And we're lucky to have Sir Peter Cosgrove, who is the ex-head of defence and ex-Governor General of Australia, as our patron as well.
Fabulous, such important work. So quickly then, how can people get hold of you if they want to hear more about the long ride home, about your work with veterans, or also, we didn't talk as much about your work with the advertising and marketing space, but if people wanted to get hold of you some more for any of those areas, what's the best way of contacting you?
Yeah, sure. They can go to the website I have, which is, www.visualdesigngroup.com, and on there's the contact details in which they can contact me, or by email wayne@visualdesigngroup.com. And with the long ride home, that is thelongridehome.org. That's the website.
Fabulous. And also, of course, through LinkedIn at Wayne Larkin, Larkin. As you can see on the screen there, just double checking it's on the screen. And very quickly, Wayne, if you were to give you a couple of words of advice to your younger self, what would that advice be?
That's a very good question. I think going through life with a heart full of love and light footprints, and keeping a light spirit, I think, and always seeing the bright side of life. I know that's sort of said a lot, but not always easy to do. And because people forget that we're really spiritual beings having a human experience, and they forget, I guess, why they're here and the lessons to be learned.
And I'm just going to end there on that. Always look on the bright side of life from Monty Python, in my head now that you've mentioned it. Yeah. So thank you so much, Wayne. I'm just going to bring the cake back one more time for everybody to have a look at in case you missed it at the beginning of the show. This is the 50th episode, and we've sung happy 50th to the show. But before we finish up, I just want to again say thank you so much, Wayne, for being my extra special guest today.
Yeah, well, thank you, Michelle. It was a real pleasure. Always is a real pleasure to catch up with you, and especially to be on your 50th anniversary show.
Thank you, thank you. And to all the viewers out there who we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you and it wasn't for the impact that we know that we're having on your lives to help you create that mindset for success. And Wayne, like the other 49 guests this year, wow, what a year it's been. From our hearts to your hearts, we're so grateful that you've joined us on this journey throughout the year. And until next year, we'll be signing off for now, but you can see the episodes on YouTube or on my website. And we encourage you to keep developing and building that positive mindset, building that positive focus for success. But for now, from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.